Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name's Christopher Hamer and today we're taking a look at a really interesting Z-mount series lens. This Nikon 28mm f2.8 is one of the cheapest Z-mount lenses available. At £250 or $300, it provides a pretty high performance to price ratio, and it's probably a lens that a lot of people are considering if they're just starting out in the Z-mount system or just want to expand their lens collection. Being a 28mm full frame lens, it's kind of surprising that this was actually marketed with the Zfc and towards the sort of DX sensor sized cameras. If you were to use this on one of those cropped sensor cameras, you'd get roughly a 40mm field of view, and in some ways that makes it a pretty interesting sort of day-to-day lens or even street photography lens. On the full frame cameras, such as the Z5, Z6, Z7 series and Z9, you get a full frame 28mm, and that's a pretty nice wide angle style lens, and definitely one that a lot of people would find useful. Being a fixed lens, it is very small and very light. This particular model weighs 155 grams, though if you get the special edition version that came with the Zfc, that's sort of silver and looks a bit more retro, it actually weighs 5 grams more and it's a little bit wider as well. I do like the fact it's very light, so obviously that does mean in terms of build quality it is plastic fantastic. In fact, it even has a plastic lens mount on the back. It's not something that bothers me personally. I know it does trigger a lot of people, but just bear in mind that you're not going to be getting a metal lens mount for that kind of money. It's one of those things, it's kind of par for the course, to be honest with you, but I wouldn't worry about it as it still does feel surprisingly durable despite the fact that it is very much plastic. Talking about durability, this is actually dust and drip resistant. Can't remember the last time I saw drip resistant on one of Nikon's lens reviews. Well, it's usually moisture, but fair enough. So you should be able to use this in a light shower without having to worry too much. And I do really like the feel of the focus ring. I should probably call the focus ring a control ring, because in this case it is actually customizable on Z series cameras. So for instance, although by default it works, as you'd expect, as a manual focus override, you can actually choose to use it as your ISO control or as your aperture control ring. You have a lot of choices. I do like the fact Nikon gives you that choice. Personally, I'm going to leave this on autofocus, but it's nice to know that you have that as an option should you wish to do so. Using it on both the Z50 and Z6 II, I've had a pretty good time using this lens. I've preferred it, I think, on the Z6 II because I like the wider 28mm rather than the field of view you get on the Z50. And it is incredibly small and light, which even on the Z6 II without its grip becomes a very pocketable combination. Fits in the pocket of my winter coat, you can take it out and about. It's quite nice for that. I really did appreciate it. The autofocus performance is very good. It's very quick, which I think you'd kind of expect from a 2.8 fixed focal length lens. It felt snappy. It's also fairly quiet. I have a quick clip that you can listen, filmed on my phone, so forgive the quality, but you can hear a tiny bit of sound, but not a huge amount, but it's probably worth bearing in mind if you're going to be shooting video in quiet areas. So I think, as I said, you can hear a little bit, but not too much, so it's not something to worry about majorly. But in terms of autofocus, it does have a very nice minimum focus distance of 19 centimeters, or about 0.6 feet. That's really good if you want to take, say, close-ups. This lens will absolutely do that for you, which is nice. So as I said, autofocus performance is pretty good, and obviously durability isn't too bad, even if it is very plastic. Though you do probably want to keep in mind that the most important thing on a lens like this is going to be image quality. Now, for stills, I'm actually really pleased with it. I think that the lens looks, or rather renders images really well. It is surprisingly sharp, despite the tiny front lens element. It's rendering colour pretty nicely too. I like the contrast. Overall, it's definitely in line with what I've expected from the other Z-mount series cameras. In fact, I've taken a picture of the same thing with both the 24-70 f4s, the 24-70 2.8s, and this 28mm 2.8, just to give you an idea of whether there are even any differences to your eyes. To mine, there weren't a huge amount. Just so you know, the settings were fixed. I did it in the studio, as you'll be able to tell from the tablecloth. So yeah, that just gives you an idea of what the quality is like. Now, for video, I think it's a good lens for the Z6, Z7, Z5 and Z9, but I'm a little less convinced on the Z50 and Zfc. Now, that's not because of image quality, but rather because, rather confusingly, this doesn't have image stabilization, or VR in Nikon's speak. That's, to me, a bit of an omission, and is really odd when you consider the fact that the SE version of this lens was sold, or continues to be sold, with the Zfc. So it's a kit lens that doesn't actually have all the functionality you'd kind of want, given that the Zfc and Z50 don't have built-in image stabilization on the sensor. So it kind of leaves you at a bit of an odd no man's land. Now sure, if you're shooting on a tripod, that's not a consideration and not an issue. But if you're using a Z50 or Zfc, I think you're more likely to just be taking family video or just shooting out and about, as I did with the Z6 II and the video clip you'll see in a moment. But it's just odd to me that they decided that they didn't need to put VR in it, because you're going to kind of lose out and your video is going to be shaky. Now, you do get electronic VR on those cameras, but it really isn't the same thing. So kind of an omission, kind of weird. Not sure I'd use it for video if you don't have a tripod or a gimbal to use on those cropped sensor Z mount cameras. Video on the Z6 II was great. I think it works well, fairly quiet. I liked it. I shot some video in central London. No issues. 28mm might be a bit limiting for some people, but I quite like the wide focal length. So yeah, overall that's great. For stills on the Z50 and Zfc, I couldn't see a difference versus the Z6 II, and I kind of wouldn't expect to. Obviously, this is a fairly light, small lens, and you're only going to be using the center part of that lens if you're using it on a crop sensor camera. So that's, you know, you're hardly going to have worse image quality. In terms of the lens, actually, it's quite interesting. It has 9 elements in 8 groups and 2 aspherical elements. So, I mean, yeah, the usual Nikon technologies you'd expect in a cheaper lens. Nice that you've still got the aspherical elements in there, and it probably is what's contributing to rather good control of color fringing and things like that. The last thing I can probably add is it has a 7-bladed diaphragm. Again, not really that surprising. 7-blade apertures on this style lens. If anything, it's kind of what you'd expect. So that's good. It will go up to a minimum aperture of f16, which again is pretty standard for this. It is made in Thailand, which again is going to trigger some people, like the plastic lens mount. I really wouldn't worry about it. A lot of Nikon's Z mount series cameras are made in the Thailand factory. And indeed the cameras, I think that my Z6 II is, if I remember correctly, although my Z6 was Japan. But I think we're at the point where that factory is as good as the Japan factory. I know, comment section, please don't, I get it. Some of you disagree with that. But to me personally, I think the quality has been very similar, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. It is a very budget-friendly lens at the end of the day, at a cost of £250 or $300 US, and that means that I think a lot of you will or should consider buying one. Shooting at 28mm, I think, is a pretty good exercise. It's a nice focal length to just go and take family shots or just out and about photographs, and it's also interesting enough that, you know, you can use it in other environments as well. That minimum focus distance of 20 centimeters or 19 centimeters gives you a little bit of flexibility too. So do go, perhaps consider one of these and go and create and try things. With a lens that's almost the same size as the 16 to 50mm, or perhaps a tiny bit bigger, and when that's collapsed, like, this isn't going to burden you or get in your way. And I really did enjoy being able to pocket my Z6 II without the grip and this lens and just take it out and about without a lens strap on it, and it was just quite nice and quite sort of liberating to a certain extent, not to have to carry around a bag or so on. So there are definite benefits. Do bear that whole image stabilization thing in mind though, because if you do buy yourself one of these for the Z50 or Zfc and you're expecting to shoot video freehand, you're not going to get the best out of this. You're probably better off, to be honest, using the 16 to 50. So there you have it. That's the 28mm f2.8. Bit of a short, quick fire review, but I think it's a nice lens for what it is. I think it's good value, and it's nice to see that Nikon hasn't limited us by making this a DX only lens, which they easily could have done. You still have that choice to put it on one of the full frame cameras, especially on those full frame cameras with in-body image stabilization. It becomes very capable. It's very easy to take around, and it's fairly affordable, so that's nice as well. And there's not really something that close to it in the full frame lenses that's equivalent. I mean, I guess you have the 24mm 1.8s, but in orders of magnitude more expensive than this. And yes, you have obviously the 1.8 aperture and the S line series lens, so different optics, but you know, if you're just running around taking photographs, you're probably not going to notice that much. Obviously, if you're taking landscapes and with a Z7 or Z9, you might benefit from that, but overall, those are my thoughts on it. If you have any questions though, or have experience of this lens, I'd love to hear about them in the comment section below. Equally, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, always helps. And make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to try and get hold of the 40mm f2 lens as well, which is in line with this one and certainly might be worth considering too. So, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye.